The town of Havenwood was a monument to Judge Alistair Thorne's ambition. A meticulously planned grid of streets, clean and wide, led to a stately courthouse with a brass eagle perched atop its dome. At its heart stood the Thorne family manor, a two-story testament to wealth and influence. Inside, Ilara Thorne, the judge's only daughter, felt the weight of its grandeur as a physical burden. Every fine lace curtain, every polished mahogany table was a reminder of the life her father had meticulously designed for her. She was 22, but her world was a gilded cage. Her days were a predictable cycle of afternoon teas with her father's associates' wives, piano lessons, and fittings for new dresses. Her latest suitor, Lawrence Sterling, a young lawyer from the city with a sharp mind and an even sharper suit, was just another piece of the puzzle her father was assembling. Lawrence was respectable, ambitious, and utterly devoid of passion. He spoke of land deeds and political futures, while Ilara's heart ached for the wild, untamed land that stretched beyond the town's tidy borders. That afternoon the ache was unbearable. The air was thick with the scent of dust and blooming sagebrush, a wild perfume that didn't belong in the manor's manicured garden. A single act of rebellion bloomed in her mind. "I'm going for a ride, Papa," she announced, her voice steadier than she felt. Judge Thorne, a man whose word was law in this county, barely looked up from his ledger. "Stay on the main trails, Ilara, and be back before sundown. Lawrence will be here for dinner." "I know," she said, her tone flat. She didn't correct his assumption. She knew he wouldn't approve of her riding out toward the canyons. Her horse, a spirited bay named Jasper, was her only true confidant. As soon as they were out of town limits, she let him run, the wind tearing through her hair and lifting the skirt of her riding habit. The familiar thrill of freedom was intoxicating. She rode for miles, leaving the familiar trails behind and following a winding creek bed toward the foothills. The sun was a molten gold, casting long shadows. It was later than she intended, and the sky was darkening. A sudden, sharp sound, a rustling in the brush, the snap of a twig, spooked Jasper. He whinnied, his eyes rolling and bolted. Ilara, a skilled but unprepared rider, held on for dear life, but the terrain was unforgiving. A low-hanging branch caught her, tearing her from the saddle. She hit the ground hard, a sickening crunch echoing in the twilight. The world went black. Jasper, riderless, galloped on into the darkening expanse. Back in town, the judge's men, led by his most trusted foreman, a lean man named Miller, were already organizing a search. Miller, with a cold, calculating gaze, spoke with Lawrence. "We'll find her," he said, but there was an unsettling lack of urgency in his eyes. He had his own reasons for wanting to find Ilara, and they had little to do with her safety. His true purpose lay with the land she'd disappeared into, a vast tract the judge was quietly trying to acquire, and the stubborn ranchers who refused to sell. The silence was what struck him first. A profound, consuming quiet, broken only by the mournful call of a hawk. Silas Grant lived in that silence. His ranch, a hard-won patch of land in a rugged valley, was his entire world. A man of few words, he spoke with his hands, mending fences, coaxing crops from the hard soil, and gentling horses. His only companion was a grizzled old coonhound named Buck. He was mending a fence post along the eastern edge of his property, where the canyons began, when Buck's ears perked up. The dog let out a low growl, then an excited bark. Silas followed his gaze and saw a splash of color against the drab landscape. A vibrant, deep blue. It was Ilara's riding habit. She was a crumpled heap at the base of a jagged rock face, her head at a strange angle. Silas's heart seized. He approached cautiously, his senses on high alert. He knelt beside her, his rough hands gentle as he checked her pulse. It was faint but steady. A nasty gash above her eye bled sluggishly, and her ankle was grotesquely swollen. He knew he couldn't leave her there. The coyotes would find her before the morning sun. He carefully lifted her into his arms. She was surprisingly light, and a stray strand of her auburn hair, smelling of lavender and dust, brushed against his cheek. He carried her back to his small one-room cabin, the long walk a silent testament to his strength and determination. The sky was now an inky black, scattered with a million stars. The canyon winds whispered secrets. As he walked, her head, heavy with unconsciousness, shifted, and she instinctively curled against his chest, her hand fisting his worn shirt. He felt the soft, rhythmic beat of her heart against his own, and for the first time in years, the crushing loneliness of his life lifted, replaced by a fierce, unfamiliar need to protect her. Inside the cabin, he laid her on his simple bed, the only one he had. He fetched a basin of cool water and a clean cloth. He meticulously cleaned the cut on her forehead, his touch as steady as a surgeon's. Her ankle required more care. He straightened the bone as best he could, wincing as she moaned in her sleep, and bound it tightly with strips of clean linen. He draped a blanket over her and sat on a stool by the fire, watching her as she slept. The daughter of the man who was trying to steal his land was now a fragile bird in his care, and the irony was not lost on him. Ilara woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke. Her head throbbed, and her ankle felt like it was on fire. She was in a strange bed, a rough-spun blanket tucked around her. The room was small, sparse but clean, with hunting rifles on the wall and a fireplace crackling. A man, broad-shouldered and rugged, sat by the hearth, a coffee pot in his hand. He had a deep, weathered face and a thick, dark beard. His eyes, when they met hers, were the color of the sky after a storm, a startling, clear blue. "You're awake," he said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness hit her. He was at her side in an instant, a surprisingly gentle hand on her shoulder. "Easy there. Head injury." He held a cup of coffee out to her. "Drink this." She took it, her hands trembling. Her mind was a fog of confusion and pain. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Silas Grant," he replied. He said his name like a simple fact of the land, unadorned and unashamed. "You fell from your horse. Found you in the canyon." "My father," she began, her panic rising. "He's looking for you," he said, his eyes darkening for a moment. "But not here. This land's off the trail." Ilara drank the coffee, its bitter warmth a balm against the cold fear in her stomach. She watched Silas as he moved about the cabin, his movements efficient and quiet. He made her a meal of venison and dry bread. It was plain, but it was the best food she had ever tasted. He didn't pry, didn't ask about her life in town, didn't press for details. He simply took care of her. She was used to people who wanted something from her, who saw her as an extension of her father. Silas saw only a person in need of help. Over the next few days, her world shrunk to the confines of that small cabin. Silas nursed her ankle, changing the bandages, his large hands surprisingly dexterous. He brought her books he had, old and worn, and read to her in the evenings when she couldn't sleep. She saw the man behind the rough exterior, a man of deep integrity, of quiet strength. She saw the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the calluses on his hands, the silent burden he carried. She saw not a savage rancher, but a good man. The days bled into a week, then two. Ilara's ankle was healing, and her head was clear. With Silas's help, she learned to walk again. She also learned about his life. He taught her how to build a fire, how to prepare a meal from a handful of wild herbs and some flour, and how to spot a hawk on the wind. She told him about her life, a world of rules and expectations that seemed to bore him. He listened patiently, though, his eyes always on her. He was teaching her to shoot one afternoon, a skill she never thought she'd need, when she saw a change in him. He was teaching her, not just helping her. He saw her as capable. The trust he placed in her, the way he watched her, not with ownership but with respect, was a feeling she'd never known. She found herself smiling more, laughing at his dry wit. She was falling, not from a horse this time, but for a man she was supposed to despise. The judge's name came up one evening. "My father is trying to get your land, isn't he?" she asked, her voice soft. Silas froze, his hand mid-air as he mended a saddle strap. It's not your concern, Ilara. It is, she insisted. He told me he was expanding the town. For progress, he said. Silas snorted. Progress for his pocketbook. My family has been here for 3 generations. This land is more than just dirt and rock. It's our blood and sweat. He can't have it. The quiet defiance in his voice was a revelation. It wasn't arrogance, but a deep, unshakable love for his home. Their romance began not with a grand gesture, but in the quiet moments, the shared cup of coffee in the morning, the silent way he would watch her while she worked, the gentle hand he would place on her back as they walked. She knew her father would never approve. She knew she was living a stolen moment, but she couldn't bring herself to wish it away. The peace was shattered one afternoon by the sound of approaching horses. Silas's hand went to his rifle. "Stay inside," he commanded, his voice a low growl. From the window, Ilara saw them, a group of 4 men on horseback, a cloud of dust behind them. At their head was Miller, her father's foreman. He dismounted, his eyes scanning the property with a predatory stillness. Silas met him in the yard. "Lost, Miller?" he asked, his tone dangerously calm. "We heard a girl matching your description was seen out this way," Miller said, his gaze flicking to the cabin. "The judge's daughter." "Haven't seen her," Silas said, his hand never leaving his rifle. "And this land is private. Get off my property." Miller laughed, a dry, unpleasant sound. "A little defensive, aren't you, Silas? Must be the isolation." His eyes narrowed. "The judge has an offer for you, a generous one. You'll be a rich man if you sell." "Not interested," Silas said, his jaw tight. Miller just smiled. "Patience, rancher. The judge always gets what he wants. And so do I." He turned and mounted his horse. As they rode away, Ilara saw him look back, his eyes full of suspicion. Silas came back inside, his face grim. "They're not just looking for you," he said. "They're surveying the land, my land. Your father wants it bad. And Miller, he's more than just a foreman. He's a thug." The realization hit Ilara like a blow. Her father was not just a stern figure of law and order. He was a man willing to use threats and intimidation to get what he wanted. The man she admired for his strength was also a man of greed and deceit. That night, as Ilara sorted through some old supplies in a shed, looking for bandages, she found it. Tucked away in a tin box, underneath a stack of old ledgers, was a folded map. It was a topographical survey of the entire valley, marking every ranch and every claim. She gasped. Her father's signature was on the corner, and a series of cryptic notes and numbers filled the margins. She saw her father's plan laid out in cold, hard lines. He wasn't just trying to buy the land, he was orchestrating a campaign of harassment and legal threats against the small ranchers, including Silas. The map confirmed her worst fears. But there was more. A name was scrawled on the map's corner, Miller's Cut. It was a small, unmarked trail leading to a desolate canyon. This must have been the place where Jasper was spooked. She remembered a rustling sound, a sharp snap of a twig. Someone had been there, waiting, deliberately trying to scare her. Was Miller's Cut a meeting point for her father's men? Was it a location for a secret deal? She realized with a chilling certainty that her disappearance was not just an accident. It was a consequence of her father's ruthless ambition. Miller had tried to scare her off the property, not realizing her horse would bolt. She showed the map to Silas. His face was a mask of cold fury. "He's been working on this for years," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "He's using the law as a weapon." The romance they had found was no longer a secret, stolen moment. It was the foundation of a shared purpose. They were both victims of the judge's greed, but now they had a weapon of their own, the truth. They made a solemn pact. They would return to town together, armed with the evidence. He would face his family's future, and she would face her father's deception. Their journey back to Havenwood was fraught with danger. They didn't take the main road, knowing Miller's men would be watching. Instead, they took a winding, perilous route through the canyons. Ilara, with her newfound knowledge of the land, proved to be an invaluable guide. She was no longer the pampered girl from the manor. She was a woman of the West, her resolve as sharp as the flint in the canyons. They rode through the night, the moon their only guide. The landscape was a blur of dark shapes and long shadows. The wind whipped at their faces, a cold reminder of the danger they were in. Silas kept a watchful eye out for any sign of pursuit. He knew Miller wouldn't give up easily. He had too much to lose. They stopped only to rest the horses and grab a few hours of sleep, huddled together for warmth. The physical hardship was intense, but it forged an unbreakable bond between them. They were no longer two people from different worlds, but partners, their fates intertwined. As dawn broke on the final day of their journey, they saw a cloud of dust on the horizon. Miller's men. They were being pursued. Silas spurred his horse on, and Ilara did the same. "We're close!" she shouted over the wind. "Just a few more miles!" They raced down the final hill, the town of Havenwood spreading out below them. They thundered down the main street, their horses exhausted and caked in dust. The townspeople stopped and stared, a gasp rippling through the crowd as they recognized Ilara. They burst through the doors of the courthouse, where a town council meeting was in progress. Judge Thorne was at the head of the long table, his face a mask of authority. Lawrence Sterling was seated beside him, a look of professional concern on his face. The room fell silent as Ilara and Silas entered, their clothes torn, their faces streaked with dirt. Judge Thorne's face went from pale shock to blazing fury. "Ilara, what is the meaning of this, and who is this man?" Ilara stepped forward, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "This is Silas Grant, Papa, the man who saved my life, and he has something you need to see." She placed the folded map on the table. The judge's eyes widened, a flicker of panic in their depths. "What is this? A fabrication?" "It's the truth, Alistair," Silas said, his voice low and steady. "Your plan, all of it." Lawrence stood up, his face a mask of smug righteousness. "This is preposterous, a desperate ruse from a common rancher." "Lawrence, sit down," Ilara said, her voice commanding. "This has nothing to do with you." She turned to her father. "Papa, Miller tried to scare me away from Silas's land. That's why Jasper bolted. You put me in danger to get this land. Why?" The judge's face hardened. "You don't understand, Ilara. This is for our future, for our legacy." Before he could continue, the doors burst open. Miller and his men were there, their faces grim. "There they are, Judge. They must have snuck away from the canyon." The judge's eyes darted between Miller and Silas, the lie forming on his lips. "Silas Grant has taken my daughter hostage. He has a gun. Get him!" he bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at Silas. The courthouse erupted into chaos. Miller and his men drew their weapons, their faces tight with ruthless intent. But before they could act, the heavy doors behind them swung open. Silas's ranch hands, a tight-knit group of men as tough as the land they worked, stood silhouetted in the doorway, their own rifles leveled. A collective gasp swept through the room as the crowd parted, giving them space. The townspeople, who had long suffered under the judge's subtle machinations, now watched with bated breath, a silent jury to the unfolding drama. "He's lying!" Ilara cried, her voice ringing with clear conviction as she held the crumpled map high. "Look at this! He's been forcing the small ranchers out of their homes. Miller's been his enforcer." Miller's eyes, filled with venomous rage, flicked between Ilara and Silas. He saw his carefully laid plans, the years of quiet intimidation and legal maneuvering, crumbling around him. In a final, desperate act, he raised his rifle, aiming directly at Silas. But a townsman, an old shopkeeper whose land the judge had recently taken, was faster. With a shaky but resolute hand, he raised his own rifle and shot, the bullet striking Miller's weapon and sending it clattering to the floor. The sound of the shot echoed through the stunned silence of the room, a punctuation mark on the end of an era. The fight was over before it began. The judge, seeing his scheme laid bare, his loyal enforcer disarmed, and the townspeople's angry eyes on him, slumped into his chair. His face was a roadmap of shock, denial, and finally, profound defeat. His legacy, his power, his carefully constructed world was in ruins. He was a broken man. The man who had shaped a town was now its prisoner, shackled not by iron but by the weight of his own lies. Ilara stood beside Silas, her hand gripping his, a silent promise of solidarity. Their shared journey had given them a strength that transcended their pasts, and their fight had exposed the truth that would set the town free. Lawrence, seeing the tide had turned and sensing the end of his social ambition, quietly slipped away, his calculating nature no match for their raw courage and integrity. He left not with a word, but with the subtle click of a closing door, an exit as unremarkable as his character. In the aftermath, Havenwood was a different town. The air felt cleaner, the people's faces held a glimmer of hope that had long been absent. The judge, humbled and broken, faced a reckoning with the town council and the state authorities. He lost his position and his influence, but not his daughter. Ilara stayed, not out of pity, but out of a need to see him become a better man. He began to sell back the land he had stolen, trying to atone for his sins, a painful but necessary act of penance. As for Ilara, the choice was clear. The gilded cage of her old life, with its polite society and predetermined marriage, was gone. It had been replaced by the open skies and honest work of the ranch. She turned down Lawrence when he had the audacity to call on her days later, her rejection a quiet, final act of liberation. "My heart," she told him, her voice calm and firm, "belongs not to a lawyer, but to the land, and to the man who defends it." The final scene took place a month later. Ilara, in a practical but elegant riding dress, was helping Silas with the fences. Her hands, once soft and pristine, were now calloused, but her face was radiant with a joy that had nothing to do with silks and chandeliers. She was covered in dirt, her hair was a mess, and she had never been happier. "You're a good hand, Thorn," Silas said, a rare, genuine smile on his face as he watched her. "It's Ilara now," she corrected him. "Just Ilara." The name felt lighter on her tongue, shed of its formal title. He walked over to her, his hand gently wiping a streak of dirt from her cheek. The gesture was so simple, so full of care. It spoke volumes. "I thought you'd want to go back to the city, to a life of comfort," he said. The words tinged with a quiet insecurity. "Comfort is not the same as happiness, Silas," she said, her voice filled with a profound sense of peace. "My father's world was a lie. This is real. The sun on my face, the dirt under my nails, the silence of the land. It's a life I chose." He took her hand in his. Their hands, so different in texture and origin, fit together perfectly. He pulled her close, and she leaned her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She had gone missing from one world, only to be found, not just by him, but by herself, in another. She had been found in the arms of a man who saw her for who she was, not who she was supposed to be. And in the vast, wild beauty of the American West, they found their home together, a new chapter beginning.